Hello everyone and welcome back to round 10 of the FIDE Candidates Tournament out in Toronto. Today was a dramatic round. We saw two draws, including a game between the leaders, Jan Nepomniachtchi and Gukesh, but also two decisive results. And in one of the decisive results, the most talked about player, Alireza Firouzja, having experienced a bit of drama today, he was on the black side and facing Fabiano Caruana had a difficult game. Let's jump in and break down some of the key moments. So it started with a Najdorf Sicilian, one of the most popular variations across all levels of chess. And here, after pawn to a6, white has a vast array of moves. Main lines include moves like bishop to e3, bishop to g5, bishop to e2, bishop c4, you name it, it's been played. However, here, Fabiano launched the first surprise against Alireza with the move rook to g1. And it was clear already that Alireza was slightly underprepared, at least compared to his opponent, as he started spending a lot of time on the clock. And we'll talk about how that affected the game a bit later. Rook g1 does support the pawn push g4, g5, and this was prevented by black playing the move h5. Pushing Harry the h-pawn forward is a bit weakening here because white does get access to a key square, and after bishop to c4 here from Fabiano Caruana, I think Alireza decided to try and take the game into lesser-known waters rather than play typical Sicilian Najdorf ideas. He pushed her pawn to g6, a cross now, a hybrid between the Najdorf and the Dragon Sicilian, the Dragodorf, if you will. And after bishop to g5, utilizing that weak square, we saw a few very natural moves before queen to a5. And while commentating, we were a bit surprised initially, but this queen move does have several purposes. And after castle's queenside, we saw Fabiano left at a bit of a crossroads here. White would love to go forward, would love to attack, but there's no clear path. Instead, he dropped his knight back, asking the black queen a question, and the mystery was revealed. Queen takes g5, a short-term sacrifice, a pseudo-sacrifice here, giving up the black queen in order to launch this pin. And this pin actually lasted for a long time. Black wins back all of the material, but wants to take back the queen on his terms. So pawn to h4 here for white, defending the queen. Here, big moment, bishop to e6. In my opinion, a very good practical move, but objectively a mistake from Firouzja. He could, for example, have played a bunch of alternatives, taking back the queen, for example, before moving the black knight. But what he wanted to avoid was the white knight jumping into the d5 square, potentially with some forks. Instead, look how the tension was maintained. He played bishop to e6. And here, Fabiano Caruana missed a huge opportunity, but it was a difficult one. It was a bit hidden here. He needed to trade bishops, and this actually favors black strategically, defending the key d5 square. But now pawn to e5 would have blown apart the black pawn structure. This would have hit the black knight. Now, this capture on e5 can happen in two ways. You can take with the knight, but suddenly you'll be hit with pawn to f4, hitting the black knight, but also breaking the pin along this diagonal. If black now, at the last moment, decides to take the white queen, then h takes g5, and both knights are hit. This would have won a piece for white. Of course, Firouzja would have tried to avoid this, but the problem was that the alternative just as unappetizing. After e5, pawn takes, and now a brilliant move. Queen takes bishop, giving up the queen on his terms, and white temporarily down a pawn will regain the material with interest. Black now with too many weaknesses, strategically busted. Here, it would have been a huge advantage for white. Going back to the game, though, this was a difficult opportunity. Fabiano retreated his bishop, and we saw a bit of tiptoeing around here as both sides tried to keep the tension. White, of course, losing the queen back in the next few moves, but wanting it to happen on his terms, while Firouzja with black wanting to delay and to keep his kind of options open as flexible as possible for as long as possible. So king to f8, knight to d4. We saw a trade, and black starting to mobilize his pieces. And finally, after f4, the queen had to be captured. The queen was hanging there for 6 moves, but now the black knight leapt forward. Level material, remember, but very imbalanced in terms of pawn structure. We saw rook to f1, hinting that white might start to step forward and attack. But after bishop to d7, preempting that advance, we saw a few more maneuvering choices, and knight to d5 met by f5. Here, Firouzja fighting fire with fire, not backing down, trying to fight for space, and correctly. But it was after en passant and maybe a couple more moves that the big mistakes started to arrive. Caruana with white, insisting on building a big pawn center. White is super active here, but king to g7 was a bit of provocation. And as we see, it was well calculated by Caruana, but perhaps not as well by Firouzja, his opponent. Knight takes e7 was allowed, and after a check, regaining the material, the white king dropping back, this is where things started to slide. Knight g3, a counter, hitting two of white's pieces simultaneously, but after a couple of exchanges, it was white who won a pawn. Suddenly the d6 pawn hanging, suddenly the f5 pawn hanging, and look how black can never, over the next few moves, touch the valuable g2 pawn. This would walk simply into a nasty pin. So Firouzja, his chances lay on counterplay on the king side. He pushed his pawn in a moment forward to h4 after defending the f pawn first, and it was here maybe a mistake. Pawn to h4, as mentioned. He should have prioritized getting rid of white's majority. Trade of rooks here, followed by rook to d8, and the game would go on. Black has great drawing chances due to the fact that material is disappearing, and most importantly, the d-pawn, which we'll talk about in a moment, does drop off the board. Instead, pawn to h4, and trouble, rook to e7 check, and a really nice drop back from Fabiano, hitting this key pawn. A nice variation being rook takes rook, rook to d8 now, and more important than taking a pawn with check, is to set up a discovered check. Rook takes f5. Black has no time to recapture the sacrifice material due to a discovered attack. The black rook hanging a check, white wins on the spot. And actually a bit of tiptoeing around here. And as we reach move 32, move 33, and the clocks were ticking. Firouzja now down to his last minute or two. Caruana also down low on the clock, and the panic set in. The stakes are higher for black, who's currently a pawn down. And after a trade of rooks, despite Caruana not necessarily playing the most accurate moves, Caruana did, Firouzja was the one to falter after king to f7, walking into the firing line. I think it was this moment that black lost his chances. He should have simply sidestepped. There is now a threat to take this g2 pawn. There is counterplay and potentially some chances of a fight back. Instead, rook to d8, a step in the wrong direction, allowed white to gain a key tempo. King to e1, the only winning move, but a brilliant winning move by Caruana. This rests on the fact that bishop takes pawn now walks into yet another discovery, and white therefore is in time to stop all counterplay and win the game. Firouzja's clock was ticking. He was clearly disturbed by the drama that had been going on throughout the last couple of days, and after king to f2, there is really no hope. Black had only 5-6 seconds left here, but it was able to reach the time control at move 40 with his position in ruins. After bishop to d5, Fabiano now had time to think, gaining extra time at move 41, and found the killer finish. Rook to e7 check. Black blocked, a bit of a mysterious one, but in this position, Caruana, rather than mess around with any fancy tricks, any pawn races, found the rook exchange. Rook to c7, giving away one of the two extra pawns, but trading rooks by force. And if we continue to the end of the game, it doesn't look like much happens, but that's because white is in full control. Here, Firouzja resigned, unable to stop the plan of king h2 to king h3, picking off a loose isolated pawn. The black king is tied down defending this isolated pawn. Meanwhile, the black bishop, if it ever moves, for example now, would free the white b pawn to run. All of these factors combined meant that this pawn down endgame was hopeless for black. Firouzja unfortunately crashing to defeat, but Caruana taking an important win and launching himself back up towards the top of the standings, only half a point down from the lead now. So everything still to play for with 4 rounds remaining in the candidates.